Well, welcome everyone, especially all the parents that maybe haven't attended before. My name is Vicki Eppler. I'm the president of Congress Park Neighbors RNO. Um, Congress Park Neighbors RNO has been a registered neighborhood organization for more than 40 years. This is an all volunteer board, and more volunteers lead projects for us. Our goal is to provide accurate information to neighbors about neighborhood issues that the city government is deciding on and managing. We do not take positions on any issues or at any city meetings without first polling affected neighbors to ensure true representation. We welcome homeowners and renters alike to our organization. This meeting is going to be recorded and then it will be posted on our website if someone misses it. Please direct questions to the chat so that as information is being presented, it can flow, and we'll make sure if questions aren't answered during the meeting, they'll be sent in a written format and ask for a written answer and posted. I have one brief announcement tonight. A longtime neighbor, John Van Sciver, passed away a couple of weeks ago. He had a significant impact on Congress Park Neighbors RNO. He worked with neighbors on neighborhood issues, zoning issues, and he also worked to educate neighbors about how to maintain and preserve historic housing. So he will be missed. He and his wife, Carolyn, are longtime members. Tonight, we're going to talk about safety issues along 12th Avenue. We've had previous presentations about the new bikeway that's going to involve from Madison along 12th until Colorado Boulevard, but nothing has been presented to us from the city regarding the other traffic issues along 12th Avenue. One of the bigger parts of our meeting, I'm going to make a brief statement about concerns neighbors have about 12th Avenue from York to Teller Elementary. And then Michelle Padilla is here representing the PTA for Teller. And she and Sabrina Bates are going to talk to us about the safety issues around Teller, which have been extremely troublesome. As everyone knows, 12th Avenue is the bikeway, and it has long been a bikeway. But now we have two very significant bikeways merging from Garfield onto 12th and Madison to Colorado Boulevard. Prior to that, the bikeways run along 12th Avenue through two commercial zones. And one of the big conflicts that has come up in the neighborhood is we have a lot of parking in alleys. When people try to exit the alley, because of the way cars are parked along 12th, it's dangerous for both the bike rider and the driver, because if you park right up next to the alley exit, no one can see. And so we would like DOTI to consider parking setbacks where the alley exits onto the 12th Avenue bikeway. The next issue is we've had multiple traffic accidents involving peds and cars at the intersection of 12th and Clayton There is a four-way stop at Elizabeth and 12th at the entrance of the commercial zone, but at 12th and Clayton, there is none. There is a stop sign on Fillmore where there's very little traffic at all. We have big problems with speeding. We have misplaced stop signs, and everything is basically, the laws that exist are not being enforced. And we would like Ashlee, after the presentation, to talk to us about how we can solve those two issues. Sabrina and Michelle, would you like to start addressing the traffic issues around Teller?
Sure, yes, we would like to do that, and thank you for the opportunity. Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Padilla. I am a parent of a soon-to-be kindergartner at Teller Elementary. I also live in Congress Park, and I'm here tonight also with Caroline Allen, who is the president of PTA at Teller, and Sabrina Bates, who is our principal of Teller, and Abram Jansen, who is our assistant. So where we're going to start is I am going to share with you a slideshow. Now, I promise you, I have no intention of boring everybody. This is pretty short, but I do just want to make sure that we have some very good visuals for everyone to understand where we have been, things that we have tried to do, and where we are now, and go from there. So without further ado, I'm just going to confirm everyone can see my slides. It should say Teller Elementary. All right, great. So where we're starting here is I'm going to actually have Sabrina and A share a little bit about the Teller Elementary and some overview. So I'll let you guys share.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. Hi, my name is Sabrina Bates. I'm the proud principal at Teller Elementary School. You all are seeing me in like the rarest form. I'm on the summer break and taking full advantage of that. So I spent some time down at the lake today and got pretty red. So I apologize for presenting in such a sunburned state, but thanks for being with us. We thought we would start our presentation with just sharing some information about Teller, our current state, and kind of where we're headed over the next couple of years, and how this information has really contributed to the traffic issues and the congestion that we are currently facing. So Teller continues to be a neighborhood school. We are definitely a school that has been sought out over the past 4 years. Abe and I, we are heading into our 5th year leading at Teller. And when we first started, we had a population of about 350 children. And now we're at about 540 children. That does include our ECE classes. But as you can see, over the past 4 years, our school has been growing steadily, which has contributed to a lot of the congestion issues that we have been facing over the past 4 years. Additionally, we found out the last day of school for Abe and I, which was last Friday, Teller is now going to become home to an autism severe center that will be starting this fall. We have had a center-based program at our school in the past. It was called multi-intensive. Children in that program usually have severe physical disabilities, or they have an IQ lower than 72. That program is actually moving to Park Hill this fall. They're combining Teller's program and Teller's program at one school in order to open up a classroom at Teller, because right now we are completely maxed out We have intervention even happening in the hallways and in closets because we're so big. But that is freeing up one of our smallest classrooms in order to welcome the Autism Severe Center this fall. So this will be a year 0 for us, which is an implementation year. So we will spend the entire year getting the school ready to welcome kids the following year, which will be, it will take quite a bit of time and energy and effort to make sure everyone is ready to go the following fall. But we're really excited about continuing to include children of all ranges at our school. And then another thing we've talked about that was a pretty big shift that we're gearing up for this fall is Teller is one of, I think it's 30 elementary schools this fall that is shifting to an earlier bell schedule. The district has stated there are transportation issues with the current bell schedules. And so the majority of schools throughout DPS are going to be on one of 3 schedules. Teller's new bell schedule will be a 7:35 start time, which is a significant change. We currently start school at 8:10. And so with the time change in the fall, it means students will be coming to school at daybreak. And so it will be dark outside, which we believe will hinder the walkability to our school and have more families driving to school in the fall, which will just congest the streets around our school even more. Jansen, do you want to chime in? Is there anything that I forgot?
Just one thing that I think is important to note. Hi, everybody. I'm Abe Jansen. I'm the assistant principal at Teller. One thing I think it's important to note is through the school choice process in Denver Public Schools, we have about 175 of our 540 kids choice into Teller, which means they live in a neighborhood outside of Congress Park. And because we don't have DPS transportation, all 175 of those kids drive into the neighborhood. And so there's a significant influx of cars because we have so many kids that do choose to choice into our school, which is a blessing for us, but causes really significant traffic concerns and congestion around our campus, specifically, from 7:45 to 8:15, and then at the end of the day from 2:30 to 3 o'clock. So the choice piece really does contribute to the congestion around campus. That was it. That's all I was thinking about.
The other thing I was going to add that I didn't mention is before Abe and I took over the building, we had more families choicing out of Teller, where we have the majority of our neighborhood families coming back to Teller. And so we're really, really excited and happy that families are choosing to return to their neighborhood school. But because of all of those families returning, our population just continues to grow year after year. It's definitely not something we're complaining about because there are schools in Denver that are seeing significant enrollment declines. And so we feel very grateful that our school population is doing as well as it is. And then the last thing I was going to add is I know this is going to become more widespread information this fall, but as schools in the Southwest region in Denver Public Schools continue to see a decline in enrollment, there's a lot of conversations around closing smaller schools, combining smaller schools, and shifting kids up to the central region, which is where Teller is located. And so we may see in the next year or so another large increase in population as the schools in the Southwest region, children are moved back to the central region. So that's just another thing that I think that is important to note, because it means that we may have another boost of kids in years to come. Michelle, how was that? Anything else that you'd like us to say or that we missed?
No, Sabrina, I think you and Abe captured everything, and I really appreciate the thought that you put into this. And I think it's also especially important to mention that the issues that we're talking about tonight and the issues that we're demanding resolution to isn't just for next year. This is long term, especially if we have more students that will be attending Teller in the future. So I'll just kind of walk you through quickly the path that has taken us here tonight. So I'll start by some accidents that have actually happened. So we had a faculty member hit by a car not too long ago. And then more recently, a few weeks ago before the end of school, we had a child who was also hit by a car. Myself and my son were almost hit by a car on Garfield Street the day that we came back from spring break, so the first day back to school. And that was really, very terrorizing, horrifying. And I had to yank my son and myself right in behind my car to avoid from getting hit. So that's when this became a personal issue for me. It should have been an issue earlier because this shouldn't be happening, but when it happens to me and to my son, game on. So at this point, what we find, and this is through observation every single day, dropping off my child and also walking to school with Sabrina and a couple representatives from DOTI, as well as some DPS Safe School representatives as well. We saw that drivers consistently speed around Teller, not only just on the 12th Avenue corridor and throughout Congress Park, but obviously with kids, it becomes a bigger concern here. So we see drivers consistently run the four-way stop signs around Teller, whether that's 12th and Garfield, 12th and Jackson, or 11th Garfield and 11th on Jackson. Other areas as well, but those are the immediate corners that encompass Teller Elementary. And then also we know that there are construction detours based on different projects that are happening that is causing more congestion around Teller as well. So that's something else that we need to be aware of. So when Sabrina and I met with DOTI and their two representatives, there has been multiple requests, both verbally as well as an email to Chris Hynes' office, that we have requested before the end of the year for DOTI to come out and observe the chaos and the congestion in the morning at Teller, but that never happened. We didn't even get a response. So that's a problem. Pickup and drop off, you might assume that they are the same animal, but there is a difference. And one of those reasons that there's a difference is because we start, especially next year, we're starting earlier. There's more congestion, more traffic, more kids walking to school or won't be walking to school next year in the morning. We have to consider the daylight hours, the colder temperatures. So it's really disappointing that our request for an observation and to show the difference between pickup and drop off in the morning went unheard. In May, we had a PTA meeting. Chris Hynes was there. Chris, I know you're here. So you promised a few things, including having a crosswalk painted at 12th in Jackson. That hasn't happened. What we do know is that three sides of this intersection were painted, but apparently the workers forgot the other side. Don't really know how to explain that. But you did say that that would be taken care of right away. It's June, it hasn't happened. And I was just there yesterday to check on that progress. And then further, between the DOTI representatives that we met with at Teller that I mentioned, and then also through Chris Hynes' office, there's been no DOTI liaison that has contacted Teller or the PTA to inquire so that we can get these things moving. And so that is a very big concern. It is just extremely frustrating for all of us. So I just want to put that out there that's the path that has brought us here today. So some of the demands that we're making for improvement for safety around Teller is flashing school zone lights. We need consistent signage around the school. And I do have images to show you as well that will reinforce what I'm mentioning here. We need more enforcement by DPD. I will tell you that they showed up after Sabrina and I got into contact after I was nearly hit with my son, and DPD started showing up a couple times, ticketed a couple people, but that was it. And then they also dropped off and then picked up a speed trailer that was on both sides of Teller Elementary, both on Jackson and Garfield. They have the wrong speed limit posted. So like, what's up with that? It's 20 miles an hour in a school zone, not 25, which is what was posted. That also was brought up during the PTA meeting. That was not addressed. And then they just randomly picked up the trailers before the end of school. And again, never bothered to communicate to Sabrina or to Abe to say that this is what was going to happen. Also, you heard me mention briefly the crosswalk painting. So we're not only missing a crosswalk, but in addition to that, we have crosswalks that need to be repainted and be repaired. That includes the stop bar. So drivers need to remember that they stop their car before the crosswalk, because that is also an issue. You heard Vicki mention earlier some bike paths, and there's, I guess, a proposal for a bike path to go on Garfield. For anyone that has not been in front of Teller Elementary on Garfield Street, where the main entrance is, it is a very small street, as we face on many streets here in Congress Park. However, the proposal to put a bike lane is ludicrous. And the reason that it is because we already have bikers that will bring their kids to school, pedestrians, motorists, both that drop off the students and also just use Teller as a street. And I'm not saying you can't do that, but you add a bike lane on top of that and you have kids that are being unloaded. My son is still in a car seat. I can't just say, see ya. I have to get out, get him out of school, walk him across the street. So I have to park there. I can literally touch another car, arm's length away from me or less. That is how tight the street is. So the idea of putting in a bike lane has got to go. And I'll just be really clear with some of the people on this call. I'm the squeaky wheel, and I will get the oil, and I will fight up tooth and nail to get this bike lane off of Garfield. And you sure as heck don't need one when you have Madison. That makes no sense. They're 2 blocks away from each other. So
Michelle, I think another thing that's important just to add, with our Autism Severe Center that will be incorporated in the fall, it will be the Central Region's Autism Severe Center. So children will be bused, either I should say bused, or they will receive transportation via ALC. ALC is like Denver Public Schools, like Uber service. And so in addition to our walkers and our bikers and those who drive into school, we will also more than likely have the yellow buses coming back to school in addition to ALC drivers. And so that's just another piece to the congestion problem that we will be facing in the fall as well.
Great. Sabrina, thank you for adding that. That's great. And so the continued demand for safety improvement with the addition of the Autism Severe Center, and you heard Sabrina say there will be some children there that have physical disabilities. And even without having that center there, any students or parents or guardians that have disabilities, there is one area, I don't know what the proper terminology is here, but there's a dip in the sidewalk where it's kind of in the middle of the street to allow for those that need access without a curb. So we would actually like to have a crosswalk from one side of one side of Garfield to the other side where this is located to make easy access. Currently, we know that people jaywalk all the time, and that is part of the problem. And those are problems that Sabrina and Abe are working on in terms of how they consistently communicate to the parents of Teller and requesting them not to do that. But having a crossing lane in the middle of the school or in the middle of the block would be very, very helpful. We've also talked about adding speed bumps along Garfield and Jackson and 11th Avenue, where we know speeding is rampant. Flashing crosswalk signs. So those of you that are in the neighborhood and familiar with the Denver Botanic Gardens, those went in a few years ago, or one more recently. Actually, I misspoke. They're all very recent. The Botanic Gardens has those, but Teller Elementary doesn't. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then the bottom line is that we want these demands for safety improvement implemented no later than August 23rd, 2021. That is the first day of school.
Michelle, can I add one other just
Yes.
important point? So Teller has been home to the multi-intensive center-based program, gosh, for probably at least the last 7 years that I've been there, which is students who also have disabilities. And one thing that I think is important for the Congress Park neighbors to know is that oftentimes when students with disabilities get upset or they're triggered by different things, they elope. And so one thing that Abe and I are concerned about is oftentimes when our kids elope, they will elope outside of the school. We had a little girl a couple years ago elope, and it was during the time in which on Garfield, the water main was being replaced. And it caused a really, really dangerous situation because when she ran out, she wasn't paying attention to where she was going and almost fell into the middle of the street. And so like down into the ditch. And so we had to come up with a system with the construction workers where we had air horns. And if she would elope, we would actually blow the air horns and shut all of the construction down in order to keep her safe. And so it's just traffic, construction, all of those things are a big impact on a school. And with this severe center coming to Teller, those are things that we will need to also take into consideration. I know Michelle brought up with the wheelchair ramp right outside of our main entrance, potentially having that crosswalk there. It would be an amazing implementation, if possible, to signal a safe place where kids can cross midway. And it would be a great way to include kids and, you know, ensure that we are being equitable in regards to making sure that all kids can safely get onto the property. Jansen, anything that we missed? Okay.
No, I don't think so.
Caroline, I think you wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, so a couple of additional things I wanted to say. One is that during our May PTA meeting, there were a lot of Teller parents on there, and we took copious notes and created a spreadsheet that listed out a lot of our questions and some of the commitments that we heard both from Councilman Hynes' office as well as a commitment to share that with DOTI. So we're excited to hear what work has been done to kind of workshop some of those questions and solutions and learn from that. A couple of other things I wanted to add. One is that we recognize this is a two-way street. We are asking a lot in terms of enforcement and infrastructure support. We're also doing our part as well. We are planning out for some walking school buses this fall. We're thinking about how we can do a better job of training crossing guards and re-educating parents on expectations for good behavior. So I just want to acknowledge that this call is about what we need from you all, but we also recognize that we have an important role to play as the community to support the things that are in place, and we're fully committed to doing our part on that end as well. And then the final thing, knowing that there's a DOTI representative on here, I'm sure you're aware that there's been a lot of feedback regarding the move of trash bins to the front of streets within Congress Park. I just want to add as an additional data point, that is simply going to add to less space on these streets in particular, and just simply add more to the congestion, particularly on days when all three bins are now going to be placed on already narrow streets. So just wanted to add that in as a community member as well. And also just wanted to again thank Vicki and the rest of the Congress Park Neighbors Association for giving us this platform to continue this important conversation. I'll give the floor back to Michelle now.
Great, great additions, thank you. Okay, so looking at signage, since that has been an issue, Those of you that are in the neighborhood are probably aware of this. So Bromwell Elementary and Good Shepherd Catholic School are two schools very nearby Teller. Both of them have flashing school zone lights. Along with Bromwell, they have a digital your speed limit flashing just a few yards away from these school zone lights. I do find DPD enforcement sit in Cherry Creek North, very near Bromwell, and there's plenty of signage clearly saying that this is a school zone. And then at Good Shepherd, on 6th Avenue, there are 2 crosswalks with buttons that you can push that will allow students to walk across the street. And Good Shepherd also has the crosswalk that I had mentioned earlier in front of their school in the middle of the street. And again, as I drove around the school at Good Shepherd, plenty of signage, again, showing that they are you are entering a school zone and need to slow down. And just some signage, just so you guys can have an understanding of what we're talking about. So school flashing lights, clearly unobstructed school zone speed limit sign. And then on the top here where my mouse is, you'll see, and I know it's a little hard to see, but these are the 2 crosswalks I'm talking about with the buttons that you can push to enable safe walking. And then also on the top, there is a sign showing that it is a crosswalk, although it is also obscured here. And then on the bottom right of your screen is the crosswalk that is clearly marked and well painted, I guess I would say, in front of Good Shepherd. And then there's Teller. So East 12th Avenue westbound as well as eastbound. Can anybody read these signs? Because I can't. So we have a problem. And I also have to say thank you to Vicki, who shared some of these photos with me that she took, and I also took some as well to really highlight the problem. But if I had put every single photo in here, we would have 20 slides. Then this is looking at East 11th Avenue, east and westbound. Again, considerable signage. There's even a stop sign that is looks like an all-way or 4-way sign that is covered up. Again, speed limit for the school zone is also covered up as well. Then we look at the crosswalks. So 12th Avenue in Jackson, I know there was water repair work done, but there's black on the left-hand side of the screen. And on the right-hand side of the screen, this is the 4-way, or this is the intersection that was repainted recently or repaired, but then where's the crosswalk? We don't have one. And Chris, that's where 11th and Garfield. So if you're not familiar with the area, Teller Elementary is on the right. And this is as you are approaching the playground. So you can see stop bar needs to be repainted as well as the other lines indicating a crosswalk. And a couple options that I wanted to lay out as well. This past weekend, I was up in Avon, Colorado, and there is an elementary school near my condo. And there are 2 flashing lights, again, with the crosswalk, enabling students to safely get across West Beaver Creek Boulevard. And then in addition, something I personally like is that it says right here, school speed limit, and then it indicates digitally what your speed is. And then lastly, just to reiterate the crosswalk that we would like to see in the middle of Garfield Street for safe crossing. And the last thing that I'd like to point out is that this picture on the right-hand side where it says school zone 20 or speed limit 20 school zone, this is in front of Good Shepherd. On either side of Teller, whether it's Jackson or Garfield, there are no speed limit signs, none. This is something else that we absolutely demand be placed on both sides of Teller Elementary to indicate that this is a school zone and drivers need to slow down. All right. Thank you, Vicki. I appreciate you allowing me to share.
Thank you, Michelle and Sabrina and Abe. I think that was very informative. Ashlee, could you address the issues that they have raised and how DOTI, I know you're familiar with many of these things. Can you talk about responses you can make and a timeline?
Sure.
That'd be
Thank
great.
you all for having us. I'm also joined by Hadar. She is what we call an area engineer with DOTI. So my name is Ashlee Grace. I am the community designer. I work in Southeast Denver. I work with 3 specific council districts, Council District 10, 6, and 4. I work in our transportation design group to work with community relations, council relations, and also manage large projects and ensure coordination across those projects. So there is a lot that was just discussed. So we're going to do our best to kind of walk through what we heard. And thank you, Vicki, for sending over some of that information ahead of time that allowed Hadar and I to try to put some of our thoughts together in advance. So I know in before Teller was brought up, there were a few other topics that were addressed. So we have kind of a long list of things we can go through and maybe end on Teller since there's so much to discuss there, if that works. But again, thank you for having us. And I just want to start out with a couple of things just kind of right off the bat, which is first and foremost, we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. I think that there is a lot of, DOTI is a very limited resource. We have limited staff, we have limited resources. And so it's not always possible for us to talk to every single individual all the time. So we're able to come to these RNO meetings, and that gives us a chance to hopefully clear up any confusion, et cetera. And so that's, again, why we're here. I want to also make sure that if you aren't aware of 311, it is a very important resource and tool that DOTI uses. 311, if you call 311 or you get on PocketGov, you can enter in any sort of issue that you're seeing. For instance, some of those crosswalks that need to be updated, 311, you put that in there, that gets routed to our operations teams for them to go and refresh those types of things. I mean, we, again, have limited staff and eyes on the road, so we do rely on community members to help us know when maintenance needs need to occur. We do recognize that there are projects like a Denver water project, et cetera, that they then hire an outside contractor to come and replace a roadway or whatever it may be. And they don't always do it up to our standards. And we have inspectors that do their best to try to ensure that post-project they're able to get there, follow up, make sure everything has been replaced as it was before. But again, those guys are, and ladies and gentlemen, are very, very busy as well. And so again, if you're seeing an issue, please let us know. 311, again, is the best way to do that. It gets routed to the right departments. It also ensures that there is actual tracking for us. When you email people, sometimes that gets lost because we do have a lot of staff either turning over and or moving on to new positions. And so 311 makes sure that there's a centralized record of this concern so that when
Ashlee,
you go for it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think 311 has been exercised to the max. And I think we need to talk about alternate contacts.
I am your alternate contact, Vicki, so feel free to shoot me an email. But again, if you want something addressed very quickly, 311 truly is going to be the thing that goes directly to our ops people and gets them to go out there with maintenance. Moving on though, I do want to get through a few other topics before we get to Teller. So first of all, I do understand and recognize what you're saying. We maybe haven't done as good of a job closing the loop on 12th, but I will say 12th Avenue is one of the first topics that Councilman Hynes brought to us when he was elected. His office did reach out and say, hey, we've heard there are a lot of concerns on 12th. What's going on here? And is there anything we can do? So we did look at it from a corridor wide. Is there a corridor wide issue here on 12th that we can be addressing? We did not see any corridor wide trends or patterns that need to be addressed. However, we were able to identify some specific locations where treatments are needed and or we have implemented. So Hadar is going to speak to that in a moment. But I want to also preface before Hadar jumps in, which is we apply the same engineering standards, review practices, et cetera, everywhere we look in the city, whether we're looking in Congress Park or Montbello or Central Park. Our engineers are using the same standards and guidelines that are used both here in the city of Denver, and those standards and guidelines are based on standards and guidelines and best practices from across the country. So, excuse me, when you ask for things like all-way stops or whatever it may be, Our engineers hear that, they go and provide their assessment, again, looking at all of these criteria, and we have a web page that explains what we look at, when we look at things, how we look at them, and why, to determine, does this make sense from an engineering standpoint, from the criteria, are those met, are the warrants met? Because if we were to implement things that didn't resonate or didn't meet standards and guidelines from across the country, that can put Denver in jeopardy for funding opportunities, et cetera. So it is really important that we're following those things from around the country. So anyway, so let's start. So we're going to talk about 12th, specifically some of the crash data that we did observe or did pick up through that analysis, what we're doing there, and then hone in on 12th and Clayton. Vicki, you brought that up. I want to make sure we address that. I also want to touch base a little bit on those bikeways that have been discussed. And then I think we can, in the alley issue, make sure we touch base on that. And then we can wrap up with Teller Elementary and all of the things that we've discussed there. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hadar to speak to kind of what we did notice when we looked at 12th Avenue, basically from Cheeseman to Colorado.
Great, thanks Ashley. Hi everyone, my name is Hadar and I am the area engineer for this district, which means that I work really closely with Ashley to see how we can address concerns that come in from an engineering approach. So like Ashley mentioned, we looked at the corridor of 12th Avenue on a corridor-wide scale to see if there were trends that occurred across the whole street that occurred for similar reasons that we could look into and fix. What we saw when we pulled that collision data was that there were 2 specific intersections that had a majority of the collisions across that whole stretch. So in about the 10 intersections that we looked at, a majority of collisions were occurring at 2 intersections. Those intersections are 12th and York and 12th and Josephine. So when we pulled the collision data, which means we read the police reports, which have the description of what happened to the collision, it has a collision picture, which car hit the other car and how did they do that. We saw that the overreaching trend at these 2 locations were vehicles turning from the wrong lane onto 12th Avenue due to the one-way configuration of York and Josephine. And so in order to address that, we've installed lane geometry striping, which you see as those arrows on the ground to show you whether the lane that you're in is a through only or a through left. And by tracking those collision trends since the time of the install, we've seen that collision patterns at these 2 locations have gone down tremendously. So this is an example of what we look into when we hear a concern along a corridor. We pull the information for each intersection. We see if it's fixable, why it's happening, what we can do to address it. So I'm going to move into talking about 12th and Clayton, unless Ashley, you have anything to add on that.
One more quick thing, which is that just kind of high level again, you know, we are always looking at the right of way. It's never static. So while that's what we have observed, we can and will revisit things. We typically wait about 3 years before we will revisit an analysis, unless a significant land use change has occurred, et cetera. So, you know, this is what we're seeing today, and this is what we have done to address it. But I just want to make sure you all, I mean, because I think sometimes we get worried that this is the be all end all, and we do revisit what's happening in the right of way frequently. So that's where we're at today. And if 3 years things have changed and or we start to notice things aren't as effective as they originally were intended, we can always revisit those. But anyways, yes, let's move on to 12th and Clayton.
All right, so 12th and Clayton. Before I go into the specifics, I'm going to talk a little bit about stop signs and always stops and why we use them. So stop signs are used to assign the right-of-way of an intersection, and studies have shown that when you install stop signs, particularly always stop situations, where they are not warranted, it can lead to ineffectiveness at the intersection and along the corridor. Stop signs are not used to calm traffic or slow down traffic, and when we install them at the inappropriate location, they tend to have the opposite effect. Studies have shown that when you place a stop sign at an area where it's not appropriate, drivers will speed up in between the two all-way stops to make up for that time they feel they've lost along the corridor, as well as if they feel that this stop sign isn't serving them, they're more likely to run the all-way stop, which makes for ultimately a more dangerous condition for all of the roadway users. If you're anticipating a car to stop at an all-way stop and you're a pedestrian, you can see why that would be an issue. So zoning in onto 12th and Clayton, we heard the ask for an all-way stop there, but what we really listen to when we get those kinds of concerns is, why are we asking for that? So what we heard was the need for a safer pedestrian crossing experience, and that cars are speeding down 12th Avenue, which doesn't always correlate to an all-way stop because, like I said, all-way stops are not used to calm traffic. So the first thing that we did here was we did an all-way stop warrant, which is the standard used across the nation in order to see if an all-way stop is an appropriate treatment. The things that warrant looks at is the volumes on the roadway, both the minor approach, in this case 12th Avenue, and the minor approach, which is Clayton Avenue, and the major approach, which is 12th Avenue. And the other thing that we look at is collisions that have occurred at that intersection. Things that can be taken into consideration as well are if it's at a major crossing. So I know this one is at a popular commercial area, or other instances would be if it's at a school or trail crossing. So when we pulled that data for the all-way stop warrant, the volumes on the street, especially Clayton, are really low. And if installing an all-way stop at this location with those low volumes goes hand in hand with what I was talking about earlier, people who are not anticipating there to be an all-way stop are less not even anticipating, people who do not feel that one is warranted are less likely to follow the rules of it. So in looking at that warrant and seeing that an all-way stop is not warranted, we stepped away from that to see what kind of traffic calming device we can install at this location that will actually address the concerns that we heard here. And what we've started moving forward with is installing bump outs or bulb outs at the intersection. You have probably seen these around the city. They are when there is a striping that bumps the crosswalk out. The reason that this helps the speeding and pedestrian experience is because it gives pedestrians less time in the street. They have that buffer on either side, so there's less crossing distance, and it narrows the roadway for cars. So the reason that cars get to drive so fast on the highway is the lanes are so wide, and when you see a wide lane down your street, you tend to go faster. So by narrowing that visual experience, we are aiming to slow down cars along 12th.
And I would add that that also results in slower turning movements as well. Those bulb outs usually require that there's basically a sharper turn, which requires kind of that slower turning movement. So there's a lot of reasons that we're installing more and more bulb outs across the city, primarily for traffic calming purposes and to help with those pedestrian crossing experiences. I know that another issue that was brought up was the alleys. So with that, I don't necessarily have much of an intro there, but I would love to hand that again back over to you, Hadar, to speak to how and when we call it daylighting of an alley when we pull back that parking.
Great. So as Ashlee mentioned, daylighting is the term that we use for the area around an alley or an intersection that is not parked up to the curb. Our city standard for alleys is 10 feet back from the alley. Due to limited resources, not every single alley is always signed at those 10 feet. If we see a collision trend in a particular alley along an intersection, similar to the conversation we're having along 12th, we can look into heightening that daylighting. So if there's one alley that there's 10 feet of daylighting, but for some reason there's been a lot of incidences of people exiting the alley and having collisions there, that's something that we can address by heightening that daylighting to 20 feet, making it wider. And that is done on a case-by-case basis, depending on which alleys we're seeing those major issues on. So I'll just take this moment to kind of plug what Ashlee was talking about earlier. If there's a particular alley that you see concerned that this would be something great to turn into 311. Let us know the location of the alley, and that the issue is with sight distance, and we will be able to look into that. And if there are collision trends there, we can improve the daylighting at that location.
So I'd like to interject and ask a question. So I am at 12th and Columbine, and I call 311 almost every day. If you pull the records, you'll see that, because there is a no parking zone that people consistently park in. So when there is a sight vision issue, or people are blatantly parking in a no parking zone, full no parking at any time, and there have been cars that have been sideswiped. My neighbors have done that because these cars are blocking the alley. I almost hit a biker the other day because I couldn't see him. And so how you say call 311, what's the process? Do you guys go through your records and say, oh, ding, ding, this address is consistently flagged? Or how does this happen?
That's a good question, Michelle. And I think there's a couple things. And, we will be the first to admit, like, we are not perfect. We're constantly working on improving. Part of using 311 and making sure it's effective too is how we are describing our problems. And so I think that's where we can partner better with you all and how we're talking about what our needs are as a community. So sometimes if we're saying we need you to come enforce things, we have a limited right-of-way enforcement crew. They'll get out there, but oftentimes the cars have moved by the time they get there, et cetera. So if you say, I need enforcement here, that's not always going to result. Again, we just have very limited resources. And so they may not get there in time, et cetera. But if you're saying that there is a crash history or a reoccurring crash history that you want us to look into, then I think, you make sure that that's communicated to the 311 agent so that they understand there's a crash and safety concern and not an enforcement. Like, if you're not seeing the results you needed because people aren't out there enforcing on time. The other thing is, if there's a crash history, then that gets routed to Hadar or whomever the area engineer is, and they can take a look at that data to say, are there these safety concerns that have been demonstrated? And if so, we can look at, again, pulling back that data. And in extreme cases where we have had crashes, because there are alleys all throughout the city. As you've probably noticed, that is a big trend in the city of Denver, which is part of why we aren't able, or we don't go out and mark every single alley. But once we do notice that there is an alley with an issue, in extreme cases, we can start to look at, do we need to not only daylight, consider a little bit of pavement markings, et cetera. That rarely does end up being the case. I've seen that happen in very few instances. But again, to your point, I think that enforcement, it has its challenges. We have a limited staff. It's not the most desirable job, as you might imagine, because they mostly just get yelled at a lot. So we have a hard time keeping people who want to have that job. But we get those guys out there and we try to have them enforce as best as possible. But if it's a crash issue, then make sure you're saying those kinds of words so that it can be routed to the right group. We have thousands of employees in DOTI who do a whole slew of different things. And so it's just, making sure we get that routing as best we can.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I hear the limited resources and all that stuff. Like that, no offense, but that's the same old song and dance we've heard for years, and everybody can say that until you're blue in the face. So I don't want to hear that, and I know that I can speak for some people by saying that. But the point is to prevent a crash, prevent me from accidentally hitting somebody that I cannot see. There are RTD buses. There's the stoplight that's just a few hundred feet from this alley. The idea is to stop and prevent a crash from happening.
I understand what you're saying. And we can, if you want to advocate for a larger setback or daylight, that's a big citywide policy, because we have alleys, again, across the city. And once we start pulling that back across the city, we're going to lose tons of parking spaces, which starts to become a policy issue that is not something we can't, it's something we can totally put on the docket to debate. I think that's a great thing to talk to Councilman Hynes about, is if you feel, Councilman Hynes has a ton of alleys in his district where a lot of people have concerns about alleys. They have the same competing concerns about losing their parking. And so it is a fine balance that we're trying to work in DOTI. And so I'm not saying we can't have that conversation, but I think what you're saying is something that it is an issue throughout the city. And so we can either think about, is there a policy where we want to start to advocate for, where we pull that parking back even further across the city and give up all that parking, or, there's not an easy solution everywhere. And so we're definitely working on it. And I would like us to keep moving because we do have a lot of, you brought up a lot of points around Teller I want to make sure we get to.
Let me ask one question before you move to Teller. Hadar, you were suggesting a bump out on 12th and Clayton as traffic calming. Exactly how would that work with a narrow street and 2 bike lanes?
Sure, I hear the concern of the narrow street. Based on what we've seen with the street width and the perceived speeding complaints, we think that the speed can benefit from being narrowed. Is your question about how big the bump out will be?
And I also want to point out that when we looked at Clayton, the right-of-way width changes at Clayton. So on the west side, it is wider, and that's where the bump outs would occur, is on the west side. We're not talking about bump outs on the east side because it is narrower and there isn't the space that we're talking about.
Let's, I think we're in a quagmire here. We keep reverting back to call 311. And we keep.
Well, you're also telling us right here, we've heard you, and this is why we're here today. This isn't, I mean, it isn't a black box. This is why we're here, is because we've heard your concerns. We are addressing them. And that's, you have been in contact with us. So I don't think we're just throwing you into the black box of 311. Councilman Hynes is out for your needs, and I'm here as well. And I know we've had conversations in the past. So
let's, I think the other issue that's on everyone's mind and showing up in the chat is we have to have some actual injuries and accidents. And we're trying to be proactive because we're living our daily lives confronted with this and trying to present them. And I think we're spinning our wheels right now. So let's move on and talk about what you think you can do to help Teller.
okay.
And I'm going to interject for just a second. This is Wendy Moraskian. I'm on the board, and I wondered if we could ask Ashlee and Hadar to address the questions in the chat, maybe in an email to the neighbors or to the board, and we can share them out so that we don't have, so people feel answered, feel heard, but we don't have to take that time today. Is that possible?
We can definitely do our best. I mean, I see that the numbers keep growing. It's at 45. I don't know what they all say. I've been engaged in this conversation, but we'll do our best to kind of categorize those and provide responses as well. And I would also say that it isn't just, we don't just react to crashes. We do collect other data. We do collect speed data. We do talk to the NPI planning process, which was a community outreach effort. A lot of, the neighborhood bikeways, which I know there are mixed feelings on those are neighborhood bikeways. Those are not bike lanes. The intent of a neighborhood bikeway is to slow cars while also reduce volumes on those roadways. That's how those types of bikeways are effective. And those bikeways were identified through community outreach, through listening to you all. And so there is definitely reactive. A lot of what Hadar does do is kind of is reacting to your concerns, but we do try to be proactive as a city as well. So we do try to balance both our proactive and our reactive efforts. But with that, let's jump to Teller and we can start there. I know that I do want to correct one thing that I noticed so far on the presentation, which was there was a concern that we haven't been out there for a morning drop off. We have been out there. We were out there in 2019 for a morning drop off. So pre-pandemic, a few months before pandemic, when the numbers were high, and we did observe that drop off experience. So we have been out there for both pickup and drop off time. So morning and PM. We understand that conditions are constantly changing, and we were taking notes, Principal Bates, as you were talking about what you have coming up. I do want to also say that, Denver is struggling with school zones across the city. A lot of our schools were built when Denver had a much smaller population and when a lot more people walked to schools and were on these types of narrow roadways. And so what we're seeing at Congress Park, or sorry, not at Teller Elementary in Congress Park, we're seeing at cities across, or man, it's getting late, guys. We're seeing it at schools across the city. And so we are doing our best to work with you all. Again, we do have limited staff, et cetera, but we do have a kind of a toolbox of things that our engineers like Hadar and our Safe Routes to School team are looking at to ensure implemented. And I also want to say thank you. Caroline, you mentioned that you all at Teller are working hard to be proactive, and that's exactly the kind of partnership that we hope to establish. And so I thank you all for all of that hard work. But with that, I want to, again, hand it over to Hadar to talk about what was observed during those pickup and drop-offs. We have been taking notes, we have been tracking, we have been talking to each other. And I understand that sometimes we don't provide you the level of communication you'd like. And that's, again, why we're here today. If you feel like we're not communicating to you, please do ping us. Please have some patience. There are hundreds of schools in Denver that our very small staff is trying to work with, in addition to all of the other things that come our way. But we haven't lost sight of what we are working on for Teller Elementary. So Hadar, do you want to take over from here?
Great. Thanks, Ashlee. I'm going to go through these. I'm going to break them into sections that make sense based off what we heard. We did hear a lot, so we'll get to all of it. Ashlee, if there's anything I miss, feel free to interject. And I will start with the existing crosswalks. So currently, Teller Elementary, as I think we all know, has always stops on all four corners of the school. These intersections have crosswalk striping, and as we heard, there's a intersection leg missing on 12th and Jackson, which I've made a note of to contact ops. And this kind of goes back to sending in our requests to the right people. I know we've kind of beat the 311 conversation tonight, but bringing it up to Councilman Hynes, he has a lot.
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt and clarify? We actually submitted a spreadsheet with a list of all of these concerns over a month ago directly to Councilman Hynes' office, who assured us that it was passed along to you all. That included a specific list of proposed solutions as well as these challenges that Michelle lifted up. And I guess I'm feeling a little frustrated because it doesn't sound like that has either been received or used to inform this particular conversation.
We do have a list that we have been given that we are working through, and that's what Hadar was starting to talk through, is what we have heard are the needs. And what, again, we understand there are requests from you all, but we also are going to look at this from our engineering standpoint and apply our engineering best practices. And so it's a matter of understanding what the concerns are and the requests are, as well as doing what we can within our engineering toolbox to address what those concerns are. So
absolutely, and we appreciate that. I think what I'm trying to lift up is that we are trying to both follow process here, contact 311, as well as work through Councilman Hynes' office to ensure that you all have information from us in a timely fashion as well.
Yes, yes. So we have received them from Councilman Hynes. So thank you for doing that. Yes. And I understand that sometimes those longer lists are submitted. It's easier to submit them that way. So that makes sense. Anyway, I'll let Hadar keep talking through the list of things we.
So the short story there is that it seems that there's one leg missing. I've made a note tonight to call our ops team in the morning. They're pretty quick about these things. Should be taken care of by the end of next week, I would imagine. I'm going to move into talking about the school zone signage.
Hadar,
yeah.
Can I jump in and just clarify or ask one quick question? When the striping of the crosswalk occurs, does the striping or should the striping be on all four sides of the crosswalk?
Yes, but it sounds like the one that's missing was due to a repaving on Jackson that was part of the project. Is that correct? The one that's missing?
There's that, but then there are also like sides of the crosswalk that were never repainted. So they need to
be refreshed is what you're saying.
Yep. Yeah, like all four sides don't have crosswalks on them.
And can you confirm that that's happening at 12th and Jackson only, or is it at other locations as well?
Other locations.
We
all
can talk to our
the intersections.
folks about, I mean, again, we have crosswalks throughout the city, and as you can imagine, they do start to fade over time or need.
Sure. I just was clarifying. I wasn't sure when it comes to a crosswalk if all 4 sides of the crosswalk need to include the striping, or is it just 2 sides? I wasn't sure.
That's a great
So
question.
there's certain instances, yeah, that is a really good question. There are certain instances where, based on the volumes and if it's stop controlled or not, where a crosswalk would not be striped. For our conversation here, based on these roadways, all 4 legs will be striped.
That makes sense.
But
thank you.
Not at every intersection always, but based on the volumes, the proximity to a school, and the always stop control, it will be.
One other data point I don't think we mentioned, when we look at crosswalks, et cetera, we do look at not just the volumes of vehicles, but we do look at volumes of pedestrians and cyclists that also use those intersections to help with always stop warrants, et cetera. And when we work with, the reason schools also usually are, they're schools, but in general, anywhere where there's students or kids using a crosswalk, they're counted as more people. So they get a higher ranking because we consider them more vulnerable roadway users. So if there are folks like that, we do have a way to kind of adjust our data points so that we are giving, you know, those more vulnerable users more like engineering consideration. I just wanted to throw that out there as well, because we don't just look at, are the cars moving quickly enough or anything like that. It is very much who are the pedestrians, who are the users that are the more vulnerable users on our roadways. Anyway, back to you, Hadar.
Great.
School zone signage.
School zone signage. So as Ashlee mentioned, we have been to the field in November of 2019 and April of 2021. When we looked at the school zone signage, we saw what you have told us about tonight, that there is existing school zone ahead signage and school zone speed signage. However, they are blocked by the foliage, which, as I'm sure you're familiar with, is a time of year. So I noticed it when I was there in April, didn't notice it when I was in November. So we are going to be coordinating with our forestry department to set up a regular trimming of those trees in order for those signs to become visible, because what's the point of having them if they're not going to be seen? So we hear that concern regarding those signs. Going to be cutting back the foliage that is currently blocking them. The next thing to cover is those 20-mile-an-hour signs. So I'm sorry, I forget who was speaking to it, but someone showed an example of 20 mile an hour at another school versus this school having 25 miles per hour. Currently, we're piloting a 20 mile per hour speed limit school zone signs to be used across the city. They're not fully approved yet. The old standard was 25 miles an hour, which is what you'll see at Teller. That was Good Shepherd, I believe, was the school that was used as an example. That is one of our schools in the pilot program where those streets are being tested to see, and there's certain things that are tested in that pilot. The 2 most important being, does it slow the traffic during those school times? And do people realize that it's changed? And the reason we would pilot this before implementing a citywide program is to see what the issues are going to be with making this change and how we can fix them before we put those signs everywhere at every single school. So like I said, that program is currently being piloted. I'm not sure of the timeline for that, and I don't know if Ashlee has any information on that one, but currently the 25 mile an hour signage that is there is correct. Just going through my notes from what I heard.
Hold on, I'm sorry, I need clarification. You're saying 25 miles an hour is the school zone?
That's correct.
That is
Kyle, I can see you talking, but you're on mute.
We showed you pictures of 20 mile an hour limit signs around Teller. So it's very confusing that, are you telling us those signs are inaccurate?
Are you saying that there's school zone signs around Teller that say 20 miles per hour, or was
Yes.
it?
Yes,
Yeah.
covered with.
So from what I'm hearing, there's both 20 and 25 mile an hour around the school zone?
No,
Because
no.
that was brought up.
No, what it was is when DPD brought the speed trailers, they had a speed limit sign under the trailers that said 25 miles an hour.
Mhm.
But then all of the signs around the school
I see.
said 20 miles an hour.
Isn't the neighborhood speed zone 25 automatically? Like school zone or regardless?
Yes,
The school zone
it's
should
the
be
neighborhood.
less than 25.
Right. Yeah, the school zone, the signs say, I think it's 7 to 9 and 2 to 4 is when it is 20 miles per hour, the designated school zone time. And then from my understanding, it would be 25 miles per hour times outside of that.
Okay, I apologize for that misunderstanding about the 25-20 difference. So it sounds like when the enforcement was out there, they were advertising the incorrect speed.
That's
So
correct.
that is something that we can work excuse me, work with our enforcement team. Obviously school is out now, but if they were to come back later next year, something we would bring up was to make sure they have the correct signage on their speed trailer. The next topic I wanted to go over is the request for the flashing crosswalks. So flashing crosswalks, also known as rapid rectangular flashing beacons, RRFB for short, which is how I'll be speaking to them, are a tool that we used at uncontrolled crosswalks. So an uncontrolled crosswalk is a crosswalk that is not stop controlled. That is the standard across the whole nation. You won't see a crossing at a stop bar that has that flasher. The photos that were shown today were at a mid-block crossing. The reason for that being is that the uncontrolled crosswalks need that extra attention versus at a stop-controlled intersection. So installing those flashers is not something that we can do at the stop signs, and it doesn't come down to what me and Ashlee think those are the standards and where those can be installed. Similar, the flashing speed limit signs are installed on roadways that have that meet a threshold of volumes, which 11th and 12th Avenue do not meet that threshold because of these lower neighborhood streets. The volumes are lower. They wouldn't receive a flashing sign. Ashlee, do you have anything else that we talked about?
The mid-block crossing request.
Yes, the mid-block crossing request in front of the school. While it is something that we could study, it's very unlikely that it would be approved for a number of reasons. Looking at the proximity of the existing crosswalks, it just wouldn't be safe from an engineering standpoint to put an uncontrolled one in between those, because you're going to be encouraging people to cross at an uncontrolled intersection. Sorry, not intersection, uncontrolled mid-block location. And from what we've seen when we're out there at the school, there's a lot of cars. People are coming to pick up their kids, and I don't think we would want to encourage the students to be crossing at that uncontrolled location when our main concern is having so many cars there.
So I'm hearing basically no to everything that we've proposed. Are you kidding me right now?
Again, we are following our engineering standards and
I
guidelines.
don't care about your engineering standards,
I understand.
because this is not a formula. This is not one size fits all. This is the lives of our children. This is our neighborhood. This is unacceptable. So what exactly are you going to do to improve the safety around Teller Elementary so that faculty, students, and parents do not get hit by cars? Because it will happen. It is a matter of time. It has already happened. Someone will die, and then you guys are going to be on the cross for that. What are you going to do?
We have explored the engineering toolbox that we have available.
That's corporate language. Come on.
I understand you're frustrated.
Yeah.
tools that we have and the engineering guidelines and standards are what have been proven to be effective across the country. We have explored the recommendations you have put forward. They do not meet those standards and guidelines. So we are not able to implement what you think is the appropriate solution because those are not considered appropriate from the engineering standards and guidelines. I understand you're frustrated. The thing that I know that you are not in favor of, but is something we do believe is going to be assisting in helping with traffic calming on both 12th and Garfield are the 2 neighborhood bikeways. 2 neighborhood bikeways are designed with the intent of maintaining low volumes and low speeds on streets. They have, again, been proven across the country to do these things very effectively. We're not striping a bike lane. The intent of a neighborhood bikeway is that it is a shared use condition. And we as a city don't want to be encouraging people to share the lanes or we don't want to encourage cars and bikes to be sharing a roadway if we do not feel like it is appropriate. So the way we make that appropriate for that shared use condition is putting in interventions and things to try to make that a safer street for all users.
So I think,
may I
Ashlee,
ask
one
a
of our-
question. I'm sorry. I just want to clarify. I recognize that we are non-engineers. We are parents and community members who have experienced things in this neighborhood that have made us very upset and scared for the safety of ourselves and our children. We are not engineers. We proposed a list of solutions and you have explained to us why they will not work or function in this particular place or space. What I hear Michelle asking is also, what recommendations do you all have as engineers, as people who are residents of this community as well? Because clearly you all know more about than we do about engineering. So please tell us that you have more to offer than bike lanes tonight.
Well, one of the parts of the bike lane that will be going in is that at 12th and Garfield, there will be bulb outs that will be installed. So that will shorten, again, bulb outs, shorten the crossing distance. They provide greater visibility for people that are crossing those crosswalks. They make sure that the turning radius is so that cars have to turn slower onto those. I mean, part of this is enforcement, and I believe DPD is on here, and part of this is the work that you are already doing, which is working with your parents and your teachers, etc. But there are not demonstrated issues on these. I understand what you are saying as a parent. I have 2 small children myself. I understand what you're saying about being scared and or nervous and or experiencing things that make you feel like more needs to be done. But there are not needs that have been identified that can be solved through engineering here. And that's what
I'd like to take control of the meeting here for a minute. I think at the beginning of the meeting, the teller principal explained to you the profound change in population, which is, and we have major construction around us. We're coming to you this way because it's a very serious issue. And essentially, you're offering us painted crosswalks, which should have been there anyway, and to trim the signs. So I think maybe Chris Hynes could speak now about how he could support us. I think we've come to you very proactively, trying to solve problems, and it is extremely frustrating. Well, I'm glad you're thinking about all the schools citywide, but we have 2 public schools in Congress Park that have profoundly different signage than Teller does. There is a lack of equity. And if you went to those sites, you would see it. And we've tried to explain that. Chris, could you speak?
I would like to turn it over to Councilman Hynes, but I would also like to say that when we look at school by school and we look at the roadway conditions, the speeds and the volumes on those streets, and that determines what tools we have available. whether it's a flashing light or whether it's a sign, that's all determined by what the conditions are that surround those schools as well. So I'll leave it at that. I know you're not happy with me, and I'll turn it over to President Hynes.
No, appreciate you done nothing. You apply formulas
Let's
without
let Chris
using
speak.
common sense.
Michelle,
Oh, crap.
let's let
Yeah,
Chris speak.
Let's see what he has to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the presentation. It was, I think that the information that you shared in the Teller PTA meeting that I attended about a month ago is very similar. Just for what it's worth, we did send the information over to DOTI. Once we learned that Congress Park Neighbors had already organized a meeting, we thought that this was the venue in which you wanted to hear the responses from that conversation. So that's a mistake on me. I should have been more proactive in getting a separate meeting outside of this one sooner, so that you felt heard quicker. So that's I believe that's a mistake that I will learn from, and won't wait until an Arno meeting to give you a response, specifically a meeting to discuss the response, not just even just a written response. So I hear that you I hear that. So and then as far as the response from DOTI, I'm learning their response tonight as well. So I didn't get the information. I didn't get the sneak peek of the information, and so I am also hearing this at the same time as you are. So I certainly want to understand more from what DOTI has presented tonight. I think that it's important for us to circle the city wagon, so to speak, and understand the thought process and how we came to these particular solutions. As far as the equity about Bromwell and Good Shepherd, I want to take a look at that too, because part of the reason why we do these citywide implementations and we use the same formula for every instance is because District 10 has Capitol Hill and it has Country Club and Bromwell as an example, and there's concern that sometimes things get put into some neighborhoods that don't get put into other neighborhoods, and so DOTI and all city agencies are very careful with their processes, just to make sure that we don't show favoritism. And that's very frustrating to our Country Club residents, by the way, and very frustrating to the Cherry Creek residents, and obviously frustrating to Congress Park. And so it's
not about favoritism. It's not about that. It's about the safety of our students. So let's get that straight.
I hear you. And I also hear in the PTA meeting a month ago and tonight that Teller is dramatically changing. That even just 4 years ago when Principal Bates took over, most people were choicing away, and now the neighborhood people are coming back and people are choicing in. So that's a pretty sizable shift. Also, the size of the population of the school has increased as well. And I remember actually I'm pretty sure it was at Teller. I remember a town hall at Teller.
Yeah.
A year ago. It was in the before times, before COVID, and there were discussions about how the CFO of Denver Public Schools and some of the analysts. There was a DPS analyst there, and they were saying even just a year ago, a little over a year and a half ago, they were saying that the demographics weren't changing, and so I think that's also part of the shift is that Teller is changing significantly and quickly. So I just want to make sure that that DOTI has factored that in. I'm assuming that they have, but I think that's an important conversation to have.
If I could ask a question to DOTI and Ashlee, what is your position on raised crosswalks? And is DOTI looking at those as solutions?
Thank you for asking that, Roger. That is, raised crosswalks and speed bumps are not something the city has done in the past. We are piloting them. They are in design on a few very select roadways at the moment, with the intent of, we hope we can, the reason they haven't been used is because there are issues with emergency vehicles, with maintenance vehicles, a slew of concerns that have kept us from doing them in the past, but we want to figure out how to overcome that so that we can start implementing them citywide. So we will be designing and installing some in the coming year for study to see how we can overcome all those things that we get the pushback from our emergency vehicles and maintenance, so that we can work out the kinks of design and start to use those as tools. So the short answer is we don't have those at our fingertips today, but the long answer is it is our goal to be able to use those in the city once we work through all of those issues and the pushback we receive when we talk about those.
I also have a question for Councilman Hynes. I was really curious why 16th Ave, due to the 17th Ave roadway closure, why is 16th Ave closed to cut through traffic, local traffic only, and there's a DPD officer blocking traffic there, and we allow traffic from the 14th Avenue closure to go into Congress Park into 12th Avenue. Talk about a really insane equity issue. I'm really disappointed in seeing that.
First time ever talking while I'm muted. One would think that I've got that figured out by now. I think we might have someone from the police department here. The police chief is a mayoral appointee, and so the information that I get is a courtesy. They don't always tell me information in advance. So that's something that I learned tonight. I didn't know that there was a police officer limiting traffic. So if we have someone from the police department, I'd be curious if you have that context.
We're closing in on 8:30.
Vicki, do I have just a second to add a couple points that I think are really important?
Sabrina.
Thank you. A couple points that I was thinking about throughout the conversation that I think are important for us to continue to have conversations about and consider. I think it is important that Teller is not written off. And with saying that, I know that it's going to be important to have continued studies and visits done at our school at various times throughout the day, various times throughout the year, so the city can see the impact of our growing population. A single visit in a year or 2 visits over the course of 3 years is not going to give you the data you're looking for. And so if we're talking about engineering standards and data, and those are the points we're using to make our decisions, you're not going to get the data you're looking for or the data in which we're advocating that is happening on a daily basis with 2 visits. So I hope that can be a commitment because the continued change in population is only going to contribute to these needs. And I have very, very passionate parents at my school who will continue to be those squeaky wheels because they're doing right by our kids. I think another thing that's important, we had talked about at our last traffic assessment about potentially implementing a second kiss and go lane. So right now we have a kiss and go lane at the backside of our school off of Jackson. And it was suggested that we offer another kiss and go lane off of Garfield. And my biggest concern with that is if there is a bikeway on Garfield, and a kiss and go lane, and then traffic heading both directions. I'm not sure if that suggestion is a doable solution with an already congested area. And so I don't know. I think for me, I made some talking points so that I could remember everything I wanted to say. I think what's hard for me is that I am not a traffic engineer. I'm not a DPD officer. I'm an elementary school principal. I know nothing about traffic rules and regulations. What I do know is that it is my #1 job to keep kids safe. And I will push and push and push and advocate until I feel like things are safe. And so we're coming to you all because we don't know. We don't know the laws around what we can and can't do. We don't know the engineering aspects. And so when we're asking for solutions and the only solutions we're getting are tree trimming and painting additional crosswalk signs, it doesn't feel very supportive. And so I'm going back to my community this fall saying, sorry guys, like we tried again and again and again, and we're getting the same answer over and over. And so part of me says, like, I guess we're going to take matters into our own hands. And like, we will fundraise for appropriate signage, and do we install the signs ourselves? Like that's the way this conversation has felt tonight. Like, yep, we're short-staffed. There are financial cuts that we cannot afford to contribute any additional money or funds to this situation. And so sorry. And what it makes me feel like is, all right, then I can get my community to rally together and purchase signs or whatever it's going to take, because I cannot have the death of a child on my conscience for the rest of my life. I will not do it.
Yep.
And so I think that's the part that's, I've sat back, I've tried to be a really good listener. And I feel frustrated in the sense of, we're coming to you all, the experts, because we don't know. And what we want is we want our kids to be safe. And because we're not getting any solutions, I'm having side conversations with parents via text saying, I guess it's in our hands now. I guess we have to do, what we think's right. And I don't know if that's legal. And I feel a little bit let down. And not a little bit, a lot of it let down. And I'm not sure where to go from here besides, like I said, taking things into our own hands. And I mean, instead of asking for permission, we'll beg for forgiveness when a sign goes up or a street is blocked, because we have to do right by our kids.
Thank you, Sabrina.
I want to say, I hear you, Principal Bates. And with that, I want to say that, and I apologize if I give the impression that staffing capacity or city resources are the problem, because that is not the problem. It is, we are following our engineering standards and guidelines that tell us where and when signs and treatments make the most sense. It's not because we don't have the people to do. We have done analysis that is following our analysis guidelines, et cetera. So, and
I hear you, Ashlee, and I hear you. And what's hard is that you're not there day in and day out, seeing what we see, witnessing. I was hit by a car. I was. And that is a scary situation to be in. I've got crossing guards who are afraid to stand in the street, so they're holding their stop sign over on the sidewalk because things get so out of control. And so I hear you with the standards piece. I really do. And I think with my original point around, not writing us off, like, we're happy to be a pilot school for any of the things that you all want to implement across the city, the raised crosswalks, the flashing lights, like, we will be your pilot. We need more than what we currently have in place, because it's not making a difference.
Thank you, Sabrina. I think that was a good summary. We will, Ashlee and Hadar, thank you. This is a difficult meeting and we're still at an impasse. we will send you the written questions. I'll leave you with, it's not working. And this was not a conversation that brought progress. Everyone has been made aware of these issues for a long time, and now we're at a crisis point. But I guess I feel like DOTI is looking for the crisis before action. So we will be in touch. Chris, did you want to say anything briefly about the resolution of the trash problem?
Yeah, and I'll just say I too have been hit by a car, and I was on a bike, and I am paralyzed now as a result. So I use a wheelchair to get around, and I I have very personally invested and very interested in making sure that we all have the freedom to get around our city without safely. We have without any sort of traffic violence occurring, and it occurs all the time, way too often. In our city, throughout the city, but certainly also here in District 10. As far as the trash collection, the DOTI implemented sent a flyer out and didn't let me know that they were going to do it. Apparently, the people who did it didn't let senior staff and DOTI know that they were going to do it, and so last week there were a couple senior DOTI members who came to Congress Park and interviewed a few of the residents that had written in. We've got maybe 100 people, which is a lot. 100 people have written in over the last week or so, and the reason I found out about it is because of neighbors like you who wrote in. So thank you for contacting me, because I wouldn't have known about it otherwise. And the resolution I had heard, it continues to move. So I'm a little concerned about giving you a resolution, because 8:30 last night I was given one answer, and then this afternoon I was given another answer, and so I'm a little concerned about that, about telling a group here what DOTI told me last night or today, because they were dramatically different. So I don't know, Ashlee, if you, because you're in DOTI, maybe you have better information.
Sure, I was brought up to speed on the situation as well today, and there are residents that will be needing to put their trash bins in the front of their homes, and there's two issues. The one was that there were a series of blocks that were flyered and told they were needing to do that don't. And so I can send you a map, Vicki, for your distribution that clarifies which ones were given the incorrect flyer. We've tried to remedy that, but we understand that doesn't always work. So any help that you and Councilman Hynes can have in helping distribute, so we can clarify who is and who isn't impacted by this change. The bins, those that do have to place the bins in front, we have already received with the first round of trash collection, the majority, over 80% of compliance. So it is working so far, but we understand that there are residents that may have trouble moving those bins to the front. I think you're not going to like this, but many of those that have already said they are having issues have told us via 311, and we are dedicating supervisors are going out and assessing each situation as those come up, and our staff are prepared to assist with those folks who are having a hard time bringing their trash bins to the front. We will be assisting those residents, and that will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. So you can either, again, our preferred method is 311. I hear loud and clear, no one likes 311 on this call. If that is an issue, they can let you, Vicki, know, and that can be directed to us. But we do intend to assist those neighbors. But yeah, it is moving forward, and I can send you that map. It will be after the 4th of July is when it will be. Right now they're doing a hybrid, a kind of a grace period is what they were calling it, through July 5th of you can do it in the back or in the front, the alley or the front. But come July 5th, everything needs to be in the front if you've been notified of that.
Well, thank you everyone for attending on the issue of trash. Chris, you'll be hearing from us. This is not a solution that's tenable remotely. And I'm going to close with reminding Ashlee and Hadar and Chris that Denver passed Vision Zero. Now's the time when you actually have to make it work. So thank you everyone for attending this frustrating meeting. I'll be forwarding the questions to everyone and expecting a timely written response. We'll be going to the school next week to see if at least we got some crosswalks painted. And I'm sure we'll have more meetings to revisit this problem. So good night, everyone, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, Becky.